My mom and dad started their family in Arkansas. I have an older brother, but he's buried in Belleville. He died right after birth. He was named after my dad, LZT. And then my sister was born about 2 years later, Anna. She was born in 1929. So we all came to California. My dad said, when you think that it's time to give birth, that was in case of my birth, he was out in the field plowing. He said, would you come out and hang a sheet? And when she was ready to give birth, she went out and hung the sheet on the line because it had no cell phones, of course. I was born in St. John's Hospital in Oxnard on July the 2nd, 1931. The Depression was on. He had to really find work quick. And so Dad felt it really urgent that we needed to go back to Arkansas to help Grandpa on the ranch, on the farm. He had about 100, at least 100 acres, and it could have been 200 of timber and a lot of tillable soil where he raised corn. I remember riding the wagon. I was only about 3 or 4 years old while the guys were picking corn, shucking, they called it shucking corn. And, and they would throw the corn into the wagon and they would say, giddy up, and the mules would move. And then they'd say, whoa! And in the town of Belleville, that was the town we had to walk to. My dad didn't have a car, just had a wagon and 2 horses or 2 mules. My brother was born there in 1933, Donnie Lowell. I don't know who he was named after, but his name was Donnie, and as my name is Billy, not William. My name was Billy Edward, and so they always called me Billy Ed. While we were in Arkansas, we lived on a hill, and we could see Grandma and Grandpa Thompson's, my mom and dad's mother and father on another hill. And we'd go out in the backyard and wave at them. And if you wanted something, you came out and hung your apron on the line. If you wanted to talk to them about something, and they would either come over, or if Grandma Thompson hung an apron on the line, then my mom knew to go over there. Then we came to California, and I think I was 2 years old, and I remember seeing the ocean, though. We took the train. My dad was already out here, and he was working for called the BI Company, Burwood Investment Company. There's a big ranching conglomerate, and they raised walnuts and lima beans and black-eyed peas and so on. We came back to California after Don was born, and I remember coming on the train. I vaguely remember that he was a baby. My mom carried him. And I remember my first vision of the ocean. We were on our way to Oxnard, and my dad was already here, and he was going to meet us. My grandma and Grandpa Swor lived in a court in Camarillo. There was about 8 houses, 2 and then 2 and then 2 and then 2. And I remember getting up in the morning and coming out and watching all the chickens eat. People were throwing grain out on the ground. From Burwood Investment, my dad went to work for an independent, private person, Fred Snyder. He had a ranch in San Fernando Valley. He had a ranch in Somas, California, and he had a ranch on where we lived. And he furnished a 3-bedroom house and all the electricity and everything. My dad and mom didn't pay any rent or no electricity, and it was one of the few houses we lived in that had electricity. And my dad milked the cow, and all Mr. Snyder wanted was, he was the owner of the ranch, all he wanted was 1 gallon a day, and the cow gave 2.5, 3 gallons a day. So we had plenty of milk and butter and everything we wanted to eat and drink. We lived in Somas, and that's where I started to school. I started to Somas Elementary School, and my first teacher was Mrs. Conrad, and she taught 1st and 2nd grade. My grandfather, on my mom's side, my mom's dad, they moved to Somas eventually, and he became the custodian of that school. I went up to see him, and I went in and wrote on her chalkboard what I was doing. And I remember when first day I went to school, I could not figure out how I was going to get home. I sat in that chair and I cried and I cried and I cried because I couldn't figure out how I was going to get home. We stayed there for until I was in the 3rd grade. Little bitty dinky town, a grocery store, a hardware store, and a blacksmith shop. During the time that we lived there, we lived in a triplex, and on one end we lived, and on the other end, Fred and Dawn Furr, and they had 4 children, and we had 3, and they invited us to go to church in Moore Park, which was 10 miles away. We didn't have a car, and we said, well, how are we going to get there? No, we'll make it. And so there were 5 of us and 6 of them, and we would all pile in this old sedan and go to church. My mom, when she went to church, would go to the Methodist church, her family. And my grandpa, he was always sitting in the audience, but he would lead. He would be like a choir director when he was singing. And I remember sleeping under the pew. And my dad became a Christian. And when he did, he witnessed to the boss, Mr. Fred Snyder. He witnessed to him, and his boss told him he didn't want to hear about that religious stuff and da 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 da. Fred Snyder fired him there on the spot. Fred Snyder's mom was so aggravated at her son for canning him because Mrs. Snyder, Grandma Snyder, knew that my dad was really a good worker. He worked hard. He put in 9 hours a day, 6 days a week, and 7 days a week if it was threshing time. But he came to know the Lord in 1939, and we had to move out of the house, and we moved to Moore Park, and lived in what was called the Callaway Courts. 2 bedrooms again, and there was no drywall on the inside walls. Paper was put up, just newspapers. Newspapers were put up for insulation, and Don and I slept in the living room on the couch, and my sister had 1 bedroom, and my mom and dad had the other bedroom. My dad just worked wherever he could. He would hear about a bridge going out somewhere in the wintertime, and he would go over and they would hire him. And so he'd make $20 or $15 or something. It just barely kept food on the table, actually. And I stayed 4th and the 5th and the first part of the 6th in Moore Park Elementary School. And then he heard that Limonera Del Mar, which is a big lemon ranch in Ventura, was looking for help. and they couldn't find the help. And eventually they began to ship in workers from Mexico, and they began to pick the lemons and prune the trees and do all this. And my dad heard about it, and so we left Moore Park, and then we moved to Ventura because the war broke out, and Port Hueneme opened up, and they were hiring. And that was one of the best things he ever did. He made more money there than he could shake a stick at.
I am strolling along, just minding my business, humming a song. I'm happy by myself, not a...
And we lived in Ventura for about 2 years. And I went to first Washington Elementary School, and then the next year I went to Ventura Junior High, 7th grade. Eventually, we moved up to the avenue of Ventura, and my dad rode with 5 or 6 other guys in this 3-seater, and all 6 of those guys worked at Port Hueneme. And so my dad got acquainted with some of the sailors over there while he was working there. And one of them, Louise, and I'll think of his name pretty soon, but they were married. And anyway, they were attending Foursquare Church in Nebraska. Well, they started coming to our house and staying all night on Saturday night and going to church with us on Sunday morning. And they used to have once a month, they call it a city sing. And all the churches, youth in the churches would get together at a church, which was foreknown, where you were going to be. I had gotten drafted in the Army, and when I was at my base in Barstow, California, I was 30 miles out of Barstow. But I'd come home on the weekends. My dad, I traded him a 40 Ford for a 1949 Chevy sedan. So I would be safer on the road, going back and forth to the base. And I came home every weekend, except the weekends I was a bugler. Then I played in the band, 93rd Army Band. I was a bugler. And if I had bugle duties, I either had to stay and do it myself or pay somebody to go for a wake-up call, work call, chow call. At nighttime, I don't know, which sleep call, I guess. I came home every weekend. It was only 214 miles, so I would scoot home. I'd get off at noon on Saturday, sometimes Friday afternoon. I would stay in town in Ventura until 11 o'clock, and I'd jump in my car and take off and go back to the base. I'd get there about 3 or 4 o'clock in the morning, sleep an hour, get up and go to breakfast, and then go do my duties, what I did. During this time that they were having this city sing with the youth, on this Sunday night, I had a car, and so I took 5 or 6 or 5 kids to the Avenue Community Church. And they did their singing, and then afterwards they'd have refreshments. And Neela happened to be there from the Baptist Church. And she was a real good friend of my brother-in-law's sister, Betty Porter. Oh. And my sister married Wallace, her older brother. And so I knew Betty, but I didn't know her. I didn't know Neela. And so we were standing around in a group talking, and here was this old soldier guy standing with these high school kids.
So how did you know the Porters?
Oh, my sister, we went to the same church.
Okay, and you just grew up as their friends?
Yeah, they went to school together.
Got it.
Yeah, Betty Jo, they were the same grade.
No.
No?
She was older than I.
Were you? Okay.
Yeah.
But I remember you playing in her front yard or somebody's front yard on Warner Street?
Well, Mom and Daddy lived on Warner Street,
Okay.
a couple of doors over.
Okay. Well, anyway, while we were at this thing, after it was over, they were doing refreshments, and she said, "I sure would like to go for a bicycle ride." And I said, "I'll take you on a bicycle ride." I thought she was the prettiest girl I ever seen. and she says, "Okay." I said, "Oh, well, one little jag in the road here. I don't have a bicycle."
I was just saying if you'd say yes.
She said, "Well, we got 3 of them." I said, "Oh, well, then we're in." Well, the next Saturday, I kind of thought she was joking. I thought she was pulling my leg about this whole thing. And so I didn't contact her or anything. But I drove down to the beach. As soon as I got home, I drove to the beach on Seward Avenue. And I parked. And here's who coming down the sidewalk but Betty Porter and Neela.
After I tell my side of the story, Betty wasn't there, and I wasn't at the scene with her.
Well,
And I
that's the
wasn't
way
at
I
the beach.
remember it.